March 26th, 2001, just a few days away from WrestleMania 17, maybe the grandest of them all. WCW aired its final episode of Monday Nitro, a show that for the most part felt like a story that was ending. For most fans, this would be the end of World Championship Wrestling. As Paul Heyman once predicted, there would be no WCW One Night Stand pay-per-view. In fact, many fans didn't make the jump to WWE and just moved on with their lives. There actually was one final WCW broadcast though, that would air on March 31st, 2001. It would be WCW's final and authentic goodbye. The program known as Worldwide has its television roots in 1975's Wide World of Wrestling, a show taped from North Carolina by WCW's precursor, Jim Crockett Promotions. Later, to avoid confusion in the listings with ABC's Wide World of Sports, the program's name would be changed to NWA Worldwide Wrestling. The next major shift would occur in 1983, when the show would begin taping in major arenas as opposed to the old and tired studio format, an advance that many attribute to Vince McMahon and the WWF, but Crockett did it too. In order to produce the broadcasts, Crockett would purchase a mobile TV truck worth $1 million. Around this time, Jim Crockett Promotions was on the rise, but after several years of lavish spending and a lax attitude to their accounts, this wouldn't last. By 1988, the promotion that had been transporting its top talent in private jets and limousines, and had bought other companies like the UWF, not that one, was on the brink of bankruptcy, and Crockett had to sell. The buyer would be media mogul Ted Turner, paving the way for what would become World Championship Wrestling. By 1992, his booker at the time, Bill Watts, of the other UWF, not that one, would change the name one final time to WCW Worldwide. By this time, the show would consist of extra matches from television tapings, but this would change in '93, when a television announcer with big ideas named Eric Bischoff was promoted to executive producer over more likely candidates Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone. Eric was seen as a breath of fresh air following the old ways of Bill Watts, and he wouldn't waste time in forwarding his creative vision. Eric would take Worldwide back to the studio format, but with a modern 90s twist, with shows taking place from Disney's MGM Studios in Orlando, Florida. This era was known best for the ring that would spin on a platform, as well as signs that would tell the fans who to cheer and who to boo, presumably because many of the audience came from the Disney parks, and might not have been familiar with who the wrestlers were or who to root for. WCW's relationship with Disney would end in late 1996, possibly as a reaction to the increasing intensity of the product after the NWO launched earlier that year. On one occasion, the NWO caused such a stir that locals in Orlando heard a commotion and called the police. This would be the same night that the NWO would brawl with WCW wrestlers, and Kevin Nash would throw Rey Mysterio like a javelin into the side of a truck head first. In early '97, Worldwide would move to Universal Studios Florida, which grew a rich history of wrestling, from WCW to TNA, and nowadays All Elite Wrestling and even Ring of Honor. If you'd like to know more about wrestling at Universal Studios, I've already gone into more detail about that in another video on this channel. In '98, the format changed again, to become more of a recap show for WCW's main shows, with some exclusive matches from tapings added in. The version of the final broadcast of Worldwide that still exists on YouTube might be a local one, as it begins with an advertisement for WCW to run the Stabler Arena in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, on June 27, 2001. At first, I thought that this might be possibly based on the ill-fated idea that WCW would continue to run as a WWE-owned touring brand. Maybe it was in the cards for Eric Bischoff's planned revamp of WCW, had Fusion Media Group managed to acquire the company as he had hoped. One theory that's been passed through time is that Eric's plan was for WCW to lay dormant for a couple of months, and then relaunch with the Big Bang event on May 6, 2001. On television, it looked like the groundwork for the Big Bang might have already started to be paved, with world champion Scott Steiner taking out many of WCW's heroes in early 2001. The rumour that existed for years is that all the babyfaces that Steiner injured would go away for long enough for fans to miss them, and they would all return at once in the newly reborn WCW. Eric himself denied all of this in his 83 Weeks podcast, implying that his acquisition of WCW never reached the stages of this much planning. He has confirmed that the plan was for WCW to go off the air for a couple of months and return with the Big Bang event, but that we were never close to that being a reality. Now let's look at the final edition of Worldwide. The show's intro video doesn't feature glossy footage of WCW stars like you might expect, but a depressing, green-filtered time-lapse of the Worldwide set being constructed in the studio. We then cut to Worldwide's hosts, Scott Hudson and Mike Tenay, and thanks to their professionalism, if you weren't clued into what was going on, you might not yet have known that this would be the end, given how much of the show they spend recapping the Greed pay-per-view from March 18th, and they don't say much about the final Nitro. It's clear that nobody knew quite what was going to happen next yet. In a recent interview with Andrew Pope, Scott Hudson said that Worldwide would normally be taped on a Wednesday afternoon, so to air on Saturday, and that they taped 2 endings for the final broadcast. The first ending was recorded just in case the show would be back next week, and the second would be the one that aired. The final words said on the WCW broadcast. And this wraps up WCW Worldwide. Not just this week, but forever and a day. WCW gone. Worldwide gone. We want to thank you for joining us each week. It's been a lot of fun taping these shows, and you can see we have a really good time. For Mike Tenay, I'm Scott Hudson. We'll see you down the road, somewhere else. Thanks for watching Worldwide. In a move that's not typical in wrestling, we then saw end credits over a shot possibly the same one from the intro in reverse, showing the set being taken down. Scott Hudson would note that it was the editor's choice to include the nicknames of all the crew members. This might have been done to hint to the viewers that the crew had worked together and become close over the years. In his sign-off, Scott mentioned that we would see them somewhere else, and we would, with Mike Tenay becoming the voice of TNA Wrestling and an essential backstage presence until he retired in 2016. Scott Hudson was also around in the early years of TNA as a backstage interviewer and host, gaining notoriety for explaining TNA's overcomplicated King of the Mountain match with the words, "It's really quite simple." WCW was now finally gone. Worldwide, its last official broadcast. But the show had a life beyond that, at least for a little while. Given the nature of its UK broadcasts sometimes being delayed or heavily edited, the programme lasted well into April, with its final broadcast being aired on April 20th. From there, following the WWE acquisition, early 80s and 90s episodes of Worldwide would air in the UK on Sky Sports, known as WWE Classics. It was here that I remember as a kid seeing a blonde-haired and blue-eyed stunning Steve Austin defending the WCW television title, miles away from his modern Stone Cold attitude. There's a sort of irony that this episode of Worldwide was originally aired the day before WrestleMania 17. That is the night that many fans consider to be the end of an era, but while they're usually referring to WWF Attitude, they could as well be talking about the wider world of wrestling. If you weren't a WWF fan, or just wanted to see other wrestling, 2001 was not a good year. ECW and WCW were now gone, and several attempts to launch other promotions would fail. Fortunately though, the following years would see the rise of an entire scene of independent promotions, creating fresh new stars, many of whom are in the main events to this day. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please comment, like or subscribe.